Ole Miss fans, we didn't forget about you. We started a show. Here we are talking Rebels right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. Make this the plan each and every week. So it's going to be Thursday for the next few weeks, and we'll let you know what's on down the road. But we're moving to Wednesday eventually. But hang with me. That's my fault that we are going from Thursday to Wednesday. But lock it in here for the next few weeks. Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. where it counts, of course, in Mississippi Central Time. We got Leanne Herring, of course. She's the one that's going to make it all go right here for us on our Ole Miss live show. You can catch Leanne's work all over the place, and you'll see her banner where you can, of course, track all of her work on X. Leanne, what's going on today?
Well, lots of stuff going on, Mark. I can't believe it. I was just, looking at the film and everything from, week 1 to week 2. I cannot believe we're already in week 3 of college football. I mean, we're almost a month deep in. We've seen a lot of shakeups already. But, talk about these Ole Miss Rebels. Of course, we talked about, early in the season, would Lane Kiffin and this ball club be able to live up to the hype? Would they be as advertised? And I think we've seen in week 1 and week 2, and then, of course, on the road to Wake Forest in week 3. I think we're going to continue to see a lot more that, yes, they are more than advertised. And I think one of the biggest things that we've seen that I think has impressed a lot of people is just the immense depth that this Ole Miss ball club has. I mean, we've always known that Lane Kiffin has had an explosive offense, which continues to be the case. But this defense and special teams have come up really big in week 1 and week 2. And I suspect in week 3, we're going to see a lot more of an Ole Miss ball club that we're going to see deeper into as we get into conference play.
Folks, you can leave your comments and questions right there in the chat. We are monitoring, so we will take your comments and questions. Always appreciate the super chat contributions as well. And again, every Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time and 1 p.m. It's been a long time since I lived Central Time.
That
was in my past at one point, Central Time. I had to get used to that. I was an Eastern Time kid my whole life, and then I went to 1 p.m. or went to Central Time, and that took a little adjustment.
And same with me. I went from Central Time in Texas, and then all that time on the East Coast to Eastern Time, and then in between, because you go to Georgia, you go to those places south, you think you're on Central when you're on Eastern. So yep, I totally understand. But happy to have all those Rebel fans, not just in the SIP, but also nationwide, to tune in every week.
And when you grow up in the Eastern Time zone, you get a little arrogant because everything's catered to you. You look at all the TV listings back in the day, and it was always Eastern Time, and you just assume, everything's Eastern Time. Then I go to Central Time, and I was like, wow, they don't really ever say Central Time for most of this stuff.
It's always Eastern. Everything's on Eastern. Everything's an hour ahead in the future, as my kids would say.
Which, by the way, it's 6:30 Eastern, 5:30 Central for the Wake Forest game. We got Tony Siracusa, who's going to drop by from Last Word on College Football to set us up on Wake. 76-0, 52-3. If Ole Miss keeps this up, they might set scoring records. They're putting up so many points. Jackson Dart leads the nation in passing yardage. It's been easy. Maybe a little more easier than we even expected at this point. They're now number 5 in the country.
What I think we've seen a lot of, like I said, and I said it early on, Lane Kiffin and his staff and his players are running this program like you would in the NFL. So we got to treat I get that question every week, and we've talked about it. Is this game important? Are these preseason, because you got to look at it like NFL preseason. Sure, these are non-conference games, but down the line, these games are going to matter. This is why I say it's matter. We see it in week 1 and week 2. We definitely saw that explosive offense, but we also saw the opportunity to see what works for Ole Miss and what doesn't work. Lane talks about the explosive offense, the passing game in week 1, but then he wanted to work on the run game. So what do we see in run 2? Week 2, we saw a lot more of a transition to a run game. And I suspect in week 3, we've seen a lot of man-to-man coverage. As far as the defense is concerned. The secondary, I think, is going to be the unsung hero. I always say each week we have an unsung hero, and I'm going to go back to the second defense, but I'm going to go back to the secondary side of the ball. In week 1 and week 2, we saw a lot of man-to-man coverage. We didn't really see a lot of blitzing and everything, but and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more when we have our guy from Wake on, breaking down the strengths of Wake Forest, because there are some, and they're going to give Ole Miss a challenge. But I think that in this week 3, we're going to see a lot more of concentration of RPOs. And I think that Lane Kiffin is going to use what he's learned in week 1 and week 2 as far as being able to have different types of players. And I think that that's been another big key component, is having all sorts of players, all sorts of assets on offense and on defense. I mean, we got true freshmen like Will Eccles. We got people like Walter Nolan holding down the defensive line, and then talk about all the records that Jackson Dart is. And then we're also hearing a lot of names at the running back position, everything, that have the opportunity to play, that have just been key components in making this offense run and this defense run a lot more swiftly. So I see in week 3 that we're going to ease away a little bit more from man-to-man coverage, and I think that we're going to see a little bit more of this Rebel offense and this Rebel defense as we would in SEC play.
Want to let everyone know that we're on the main channel this week. We want to let everyone know that we're out here, and we're going to be broadcasting each week with our Ole Miss live show. So we want to gather up an audience, and then we're going to move you on over to our Ole Miss and SEC channels, but we're on the SEC channel this week. We'll be on the Ole Miss channel next week. So be right here for a few weeks, but we're going to move you on over as we build our Ole Miss audience, and we appreciate everyone being here. Comments and questions are definitely welcome. Well, I'm going to take this off the field a little bit because Lane Kiffin and Paul Feinbaum, they have quite a little thing going on. And I don't exactly, Leanne, you probably can read this a little bit better than I can, because I've seen them at the desk a few times, and it seemed like it was just guys having fun, totally just, poking each other. And then, of course, Lane made the comment a couple of months ago during SEC Media Days that he doesn't know what Paul Feinbaum does well. Like, what do you do right? Yeah. I think was the comment, something to that degree. And then, of course, Paul Feinbaum had nothing to do with Ole Miss, but I saw the clip where he told a caller who was predicting Cal would go to Auburn and win. He was like, I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, that'll never happen, or that's impossible, or something like that. And so your head coach there couldn't help himself, could he, to go after Paul again?
That's what I think makes it so dynamic. And I think, going back to that and on and off the field, I just think that a lot of his players, I don't know if you saw the Jim Rome interview with Jackson Dart, talking about Lane Kiffin and the culture. What you love about Lane Kiffin is he is what you get. He's this dynamic personality, of course, on social and Twitter, but he's not afraid to call out coaches or people that he's known and built relationships for. And I think that that's what is a likable thing. And I think that that's another thing that has really helped him be successful to Ole Miss, because when you talk about him and you see what his players' reaction, and every day they want to get up and they have fun when they go. They work hard, but I think that that's another thing that you love about Lane. He's not going to hold back. If he wants to say something, he's going to say it. And I think that his Twitter handle, the real Lane Kiffin, or what he see, it pretty much is pretty exact on, because like I said, he has fun with it, but at the end of the day, he takes care of business. But his players, and they just really bought into this culture at Ole Miss, and I think that you see that because his players are playing for him on and off the field. I don't think that you see a lot of not wanting to. It is the best way to put it. So I think you got to love what he is. And you want to see that from from coaches, especially head coaches in the SEC, because there's so much pressure. And going back to seeing Saban on the other side of things now, it's so different to see him in the media aspect as a commentator, because now there's this laid back, this loose, and you're like, where did this man come from? And I think that's the same thing you want to see in your head coaches, and Lane Kiffin's done a really good job. And I think that helps a lot in his locker room, because it helps create sustainability. It helps his players relate to him. And I think that just his personality and dynamics not only helps, be a great follow on Twitter and social media, but also to win over his players in his locker room and ultimately on the field.
So I'm going to let everyone know that if you see anything on our show in the next few weeks roll out that is creative, it's because of this one over here. It's not going to be because of me. She's got all the great ideas. Effort, yeah. But I actually came up with one idea as you were talking there. Maybe checking in on Lane Kiffin's Twitter feed would be interesting from time to time.
Yeah, it is pretty dynamic, and I think it's always interesting to see, because like I said, the thing about Lane is when you see him on Twitter, and then when you see him post game, or you see him on the field, he's really actually really reserved. So it's really interesting to see his dynamic personality, on social media. But then when you see him on the field, or when you see him, as media, and you see me, he's just a really laid back kind of ball coach is just trying to get things done. So it's really interesting to see the dynamic. But yeah, definitely, we want our Rebel fans to be involved. I think that's where it starts, is with the fan base. I think we've talked about kind of bringing a different kind of show. We want to share the stats, I mean, and all these different things, but we want it to be about, the fans enjoying football, and, and game days in the South and the SEC, and especially in for our Ole Miss Rebels, not just, like I said, in Oxford, but bringing Rebels, over from everywhere. So it's going to be an exciting challenge. So yeah, definitely ideas and all that. We're always excited and open to, but I'm really excited to get this show going and talk about the great year that the Rebels are going to have. And, and so it's just so interesting where to begin, because there's so many good things you want to talk about, but there's also a lot of things that, like Lane Kiffin says in his coaches, that they're really real about. There's a lot of things we have to work on because we're not an SEC play.
Well, Leanne, if you're going to be here at the Voice of College Football, you got to know this guy right down here, our buddy Jackson. Jackson,
I
if
have
there's
seen
anything
that, yeah.
smart that you see posted on our Twitter account, it's because of Jackson. So if there's any good facts, any good stats, rankings, anything like that, it's because of our guy Jackson down here. And basically, he summed up our opening conversation by just saying time zones suck.
Yeah, pretty much. We're trying. I wish we could be in all time zones at once, but we're trying to make it work. Like I said, dusting off, and trying to bring you some good Rebel coverage.
Absolutely. The other thing about this schedule, I would say, with the 2 warm-up games, and then wherever you want to rank the Wake Forest game. I don't want to offend our Wake Forest friends out there that think this might be a competitive game, and maybe it will. But there's definitely levels to this, as some people like to say, because 76 zip against Furman, an FCS team, and then they step it up a little against Middle Tennessee, a decent Group of 5 program. Then Wake, obviously, out of the ACC, not a really good team expected this year, but obviously quality power conference players on the field. So if you could put together a schedule and expect a little bit more out of your team each week in building up for an SEC season, this is about the best way to build a schedule to lead up to the SEC opener.
Exactly. And like I said, I'm really going to go back to this NFL model that I really feel like Lane Kiffin and this Ole Miss Rebel program has been doing, from its recruiting to its scheduling. Because like I said, you can, like you said, there's every opponent, and you don't want to give any less to a Wake Forest or Middle Tennessee. But it is like an NFL preseason, because like I said, what we've seen in week 1 and week 2 is we've seen how deep this Ole Miss Rebel club, and it also gives an opportunity for us to see different players, like our running back, our player that's Jones. Like, nobody knew who this kid was, and then he comes out and he just has a phenomenal game. It just shows, and I think it's a great opportunity for these players and this Ole Miss program to show its depth, and also to be able to work out, because if the schedule was set up a little bit differently, we might not be able to have this opportunity just to see how deep it is. And also, it's also a great way. I really believe it's a great way. It's a transition to work out the kinks, to see what works and what doesn't work. But there's got to be something said when you have a quarterback like Jackson Dart, who is breaking all sorts of records, but you can put any receiver, whether it's a veteran like Trey Harris, or we have Jordan Watkins coming back healthy, who's been another key receiver, and then you have a kid like Jones, or you have some young kids like Caden Lee that are making an impact. The thing about it is right now, the way the Rebels have set themselves out, Jackson Dart can throw darts in the air, or he can keep it on the ground, but it doesn't matter what receiver's out there. We're seeing how productive this Ole Miss team can be, with any player. And that's got to say something about across the board about what's going down in Oxford, because we can put your top guy in, or you can put your third string guy in, and they're still being effective. And at the end of the day, the productivity we're seeing from the Rebels from week 1 to week 2, week 3, there's a constant progression. And that's what you want to see from a team. And that's what we haven't seen from an Ole Miss team in a very long time, is each week we're getting better. It doesn't matter who the opponent that we're playing is. We're treating it like we're treating the SEC. If it wasn't that way, then we wouldn't have run up that number to 76. And like I said, I think this week we're going to see a lot of answers. Whatever Wake Forest is going to be, Lane Kiffin and this team is going to use it. They're not going to let off the brakes, because this is another game where they can prepare. And I really do believe the secondary, we haven't really seen a lot about them as far as their footing, because we played, like I said, a lot of man-to-man coverage. But I think in this game, the secondary is going to be the unsung hero. We're going to see a lot more dynamics for the secondary. I really see that we're going to go for a blitz with Wake Forest, because that's not a strong point of Wake Forest. They just can't hold to the blitz very well. So I think we're going to see more like that, and we're going to see a lot more pressure from this Ole Miss defense in order to be able to stop. Because in my opinion, the only thing Wake Forest can try to do is control the ball early on and try to kill the clock, because they know whether you get that ball to Jackson Dart and his receiving core in the air or in the ground, it's going to be a tough night for that Wake Forest defense if they don't shut it down early.
Leanne, I know this team's not into individual awards, but at the same time, when you achieve the type of season that they're looking to achieve, they're going to head their way. And I say that because Jackson Dart, as I mentioned off the top, is leading the nation in passing yards. And I've always thought that to win a Heisman Trophy, there's usually three components involved. Number one, winning. Number two, statistics. Number three, having that play, that splash play for a quarterback, maybe that game-winning drive, whether it be against an LSU or a Georgia or somebody of that nature, a drive that people remember, a drive, a throw, a catch, one play that really is a signature play or a signature game or series for a particular player. And then with Jackson Dart, I'm not real bright because it just struck me. That's a great name for a quarterback. He's got the name for it as well, Jackson Dart. That just fits. But there might be some accolades coming his way if he keeps this up.
Oh, no doubt. And even if he's left out of the early favorites, you can't help. And I think that's the big thing about Ole Miss, Jackson Dart and the team itself. There's a lot of kids right now that are putting up numbers, not just in the SEC, but are breaking records, nationally. And they always seem to leave Ole Miss out. But I think that's the best way. There can never be too much rat poison in their eyes. And Jackson Dart, I mean, if he's not in the Heisman conversation right now, I don't know what else the guy has to prove from week 1 to week 2, week 3. But the thing about it, like you said, the Jim Rome disease, Rome, interview talking about he's got a natty on his mind. The Heisman would be great for him. But that's another great about a player like Jackson Dart and a lot of those veteran guys, they want to bring a conference championship and they want to bring a natty home to Oxford, so they're doing what they're doing. And Jackson Dart's doing what he's doing as a quarterback to help make that happen. So, you can't help but have him in the conversation as Heisman, because like I said, he's not only putting up the numbers already in week 1, week 2, and he's going to definitely do it in week 3, to not have him in the conversation. And another thing about it is he's proving it. It's not like this is just a kid who's just come overnight. He's gradually built since his time in Oxford, from the time he stepped foot now to, his senior season. So, I wouldn't be surprised if Jackson Dart isn't in the conversation, but I wouldn't be surprised if they leave him out early on, just because that's just how it goes. But he's going to continue doing what he's doing. But from what he's done for the first 2 weeks, I mean, it's evident that he's productive. And at the end of the day, what he's doing is bringing productivity, and he's showing it on the scoreboard. He's showing it with his teammates. He's showing it. I mean, he's everything you want in a Heisman candidate, on and off the field.
And Leanne, this is like what I was telling you with our Jackson here, Jackson Johnson. So he's our MVP. He's letting everybody know. He gets our social media links out there, letting everyone know that when you shop on Amazon, if you grab the link in the description section of this video, this live stream, or any of the videos here at the Voice of College Football, it's completely transparent to you. You can shop on Amazon, use our link. It's the one way you can contribute to the Voice of College Football financially without spending one penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. So please do that to help us here at the Voice of College Football. And our initial premiere show of Ole Miss Live. And we thank Leanne for being here each and every week with us, starting week number 1. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, week 1. Week 3, but week 3 in college football, but week 1 for us. Like I said, super excited, to get this ball rolling. Like I said, it's nice just to be able to sit and talk Ole Miss football. And, like I said, most weeks I spend time on the recruiting trail, in high school football. So it's nice to be able to talk about the, future Rebels. Like I said, and a lot of you were talking about accolades. Let's talk, about some of the players. I mean, a kid that I've watched from high school out of Houston, Mississippi, and I've mentioned him several times. All American in high school. Was a preseason All American is Will Eccles. I mean, he's getting another. I believe it's the PFF that has announced him as the highest grade true freshman at a 77 right now. Will Eccles is another dynamic player you don't hear enough about, but he's definitely made an impact, and he's going to continue to make an impact on that defense. And that's what I'm saying. I think this is the first Ole Miss team that we've seen that is just really, it's not just set on a group of players. And I think that that's what's going to help Ole Miss down the road. Usually you have your star players on every team, but what I really love about this program, and I think that we're going to see it more and more, is it's that plug and play system. It doesn't matter who's on the defense. I mean, you have your key players, and it doesn't matter who's on the offense. There's just so many targets. There's just so many kids that are stepping up, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it in fruition. And what happens when you build your team not just around a group of players, but when you build your program to any team, anybody can go in and step in and roll. And we have a lot of kids. Like I said, Will Eccles was a kid who was offensive lineman who also played defensive lineman. And when he came to Ole Miss, obviously we see where he settled in. But there's a lot of kids in this program that are very young that we've seen. Cam Franklin, Centurion Perkins, since they stepped foot on there, that just made an impact player. And so I think, seeing this across the board, we see veterans, we see transfer portal talent, all just meshed into one. It's just become like this hybrid superhero, superpower, whatever you want to call it. Lane Kiffin is doing something, but he's definitely doing something right. And like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out closer to SEC play. I don't really think that we've seen Lane Kiffin play as high as the scores have been and as video game like that it has been. I don't think we've seen everything that Lane Kiffin has to offer as far as the offensive and defensive side of the patches. I still think he's playing it very close to the vest because remember, all the SEC teams are still watching. So I don't think that this is all that Ole Miss is going to have on that. We've seen everything that Ole Miss is capable of. Again, I treat this like NFL preseason where we're seeing our young players, where we're seeing a lot what works, what doesn't work, but I still think that Ole Miss has a lot up its sleeve. So I think it's going to be exciting to see this Wake Forest game because I think we're going to see more of a team that we expect to see in SEC play, especially in that secondary.
Our Michigan guy, Cliff Richardson's checking in. Cliff, if you're still on the line, Michigan Cliff here is saying, don't know anything about Ole Miss, but here to support the new channel, Let's Go Voice of College Football. Well, Cliff, I'm going to ask you this, Cliff. This is a little trivia question that you can ponder while we bring in Tony Siracusa here. I know of one Michigan Ole Miss game. This is the last time they played and maybe the only time they've ever played in history. So if you can give me a year, a score, a something without cheating and going on Google, Ole Miss, Michigan, I'll give you a hint. It was a Gator Bowl. That's all I got for you. Those are your hints. Give me a score, give me a year, give me something from that game. All right. Let's bring in Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football. Tony, how you doing today?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
We are doing just fine, Tony. This is Leanne.
Leanne, welcome.
Hey, Tony. Thank you, and thanks for being on the show today. Excited about the ball game this week. It's going to be interesting. First road trip for the Rebels to your Wake Forest Team Deeks.
It'll be something. No, I'm definitely glad to join the show. Big fan of Rebel Walk, and all the work that Evie does as well. I mean, Evie's a legend as far as I'm concerned in the college football world. So glad to chime in on anything you guys have.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
Leanne, I'll introduce you as well to another legend here in the college football world, and that's Tony.
I was going to have to say, we're talking about legends here. Yeah, no, I can imagine so.
Yes, his list of accomplishments and writing accolades, absolutely. And Tony, more important to me than all of that, saves me on a pretty regular basis when it comes to court cases in the ACC. Tony, help. Explain this to me, this kind of thing. Yes. So Tony.
I spent a good 2 hours. Fortunately, did not travel down to Tallahassee this time, but spent a good 2 hours yesterday with the First District Court of Appeals in Florida with the ACC appeals case. So, it's like it never stops.
That's not what you signed up for.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it's really not. I signed up to cover college football, but yet here we are.
All right, I'll get us started, and then maybe Leanne and I will tag team questions back and forth. I'll start us out with 31-30 I saw that score in the fourth quarter, and then it went the other way with Wake giving up 2 touchdowns to Virginia to lose the ACC opener. So that had to be a bit excruciating.
You know what? It was tough. And the post game press conference room afterwards was tough. There's usually that 15-minute cooling down period that coaches get and players get before they have to go in and meet with the media. Dave Clawson usually will have us 15 to 20 minutes after, and that's fine. Who cares? Whatever. Good enough. He was in there a good 10 minutes afterwards before even all the media had gotten in there because he was ready to go in and get it over with. The emotions from this were tough. Hank Bachmeier went in and, look, I don't know what happened in the locker room, but if you read his face, it looked like he'd been in tears after this. We had players who couldn't even look at the TV cameras. They had to just look off because of the emotions of this. It was, in all honesty, all objectivity, was an inexcusable loss. You had a 2-touchdown lead going into the fourth quarter. You gave up the lead, but you're down 31-30 with just 2 minutes left. And Bachmeier played a good game. And, he has been clean this year. He doesn't have any turnovers yet. Before the season started, Mark, you and I talked about the Hank Bachmeier that I knew when he was at Boise State, and a little bit of a gunslinger, and would try and thread the needle where he should just leave the needle alone sometimes, right? And he and I talked about it at the end of fall camp, and he said, yeah, the coaches have talked to me about it, and, just being a little bit more cautious. The point being, he moved the team well, had them down at the Virginia 35-yard line, had a great pass to Taylor Morin, gets him down to the 35. Morin gets just hammered and fumbles the ball. It's laying right there on the ground, and Wake receiver Donovan Green is right there to pounce on it, but instead tries to pick it up to get more yardage and drops the ball. Virginia recovers. Wake's got to use all 3 timeouts on defense. They wind up getting the ball back with about 50 seconds left at their own 5-yard line. It really was, as losses go, pretty inexcusable. Look, Virginia is an improved team. Virginia is pretty typical of the rest of the ACC. When I get asked about it every week, we shrug our shoulders. We don't know what the ACC is. Florida State was the prohibitive favorite at the beginning of the season to win the conference, and Florida State ain't good. Clemson was number 2. We don't know what Clemson is. They beat up on App State this last week at home and pulled Cade Klubnik at halftime because they had such a huge lead. That was 2 weeks after getting beat up by Georgia. We don't know what Clemson is. Miami, you already know what I've said about Miami. A lot of talent, and that Mario Cristobal can recruit. He can do the shopping. I don't want him in the kitchen doing the cooking because there are too many in-game coaching mistakes over the years, going all the way back to my being on the West Coast and covering him at Oregon. I think it went, to some Miami fans when a couple of weeks ago I referred to Mario as Instacart. He can do my shopping for me, but I don't want him doing the cooking. So we don't know what the ACC is. And so to lose a game like that was really tough. And now comes the toughest part. Talking to Dave Clawson on Tuesday, pulling the team back together emotionally, because as Clawson said, this Ole Miss team is probably the best team Wake Forest will have faced in his entire 11-year tenure in Winston-Salem. Wow. So he said this is as complete of a ball club as you're going to see this year. He gave huge praise to Lane Kiffin. He said nobody is utilizing the current state of what college football is with NIL, the collective, the portal, and high school recruiting better than Lane Kiffin. So there's a lot of, hey, we give them their 24 hours, get over it, move on. You've got a next game. And in the typical coach talk, they'll always say, yeah, we've practiced well. We look good. They've moved on. I don't know. I don't know if they have. And whether they have or haven't, this has the makings of a very lopsided game.
And I'm going to cut off Leanne real quick just to say, did anybody remind Coach Clawson that they faced the Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence Clemson national championship teams?
He said this team is just as good as those Clemson teams.
Okay.
Oh,
He said
goodness.
it's just as good. He didn't say they were better than those Clemson teams, but he said this is just as good as any team or better than any team he's faced in his time here. A lot of respect for Lane Kiffin. Look, as somebody who lives and dies on social media, I love Lane. I think
We were just talking about that.
Yeah, I love seeing the guy on social media, and hey, more juice Kiffin while we're at it, right? But this game has the potential to break down a few ways. The Wake Forest offense is good. Like I said, Bachmeier throwing 66%. I think he's number 9 in the country in total yards right now. Of course, everybody knows Jackson Dart is number 1 by a lot. So he's doing well. He's not making the mistakes. He's moving the team. They have a running game for the first time in a while. Now that Damon Claiborne isn't having to share the ball with Justice Ellison or anyone else in the backfield, they've got a viable running game. And of course, they've got good receivers. The challenge is this. Believe it or not, while Jackson Dart and the offense are going to create tons of challenges for the Wake Forest defense, I see the challenge going the other way. It's Walter Nolan against the Wake Forest offensive line. Nolan is just a beast. And the Wake Forest offensive line has been very hit and miss. For about the 2.5 years I've been covering the team since I moved out from California. And it feels like a huge mismatch. It really does. I think there is the challenge right there. Last week, Bachmeier admitted he was holding on to the ball a little too long while they took 6 sacks. He put them all on him, but you look back at the game film like, we do around here, and easily 3 of them were on him for holding on to the ball too long. This has got to be a quick release offense, which there's nothing about the slow mesh that is quick. So it's a little counterintuitive. On the other side of the ball, Clausen had 2 major goals for the defense this year coming out of camp. Don't get beat over the top like they were last year, even though they had really good defensive backs last year. Kalen Carson and Malik Mustafa are in the NFL now. But they got beat over the top a little too frequently. And get off the field on 3rd down. You can't let teams continue the series. They've been pretty successful. They haven't gotten beat deep by anybody, but they played North Carolina A&T and they played Virginia. Anthony Colindre at Virginia is a pretty good quarterback. He's not in the same conversation with Jackson Dart. Not a lot of quarterbacks are right now, but they're not getting beat deep, but they're not getting off the field on 3rd down. They didn't against Virginia. The challenge has been Virginia picked up the pace of the offense quite a bit in the 2nd and 4th quarters. There's a reason it was 2nd and 4th. They were only burning 10, maybe 12 seconds max off the play clock before they were snapping the ball. They were up there. They were ready to go. I was in the press box, keeping a stopwatch on it, really looking at how quickly they were moving. And they were finding gaps in the middle of the Wake Forest defense. Not downfield, but 10, 15, 16, 17 yards downfield. So they were finding these gaps, and Wake Forest wasn't reacting and adjusting quickly enough. So that's a challenge. Evan Slocum and Nick Anderson and Capone Blue and these guys are going to have to do a better job of coming up on the ball. It didn't happen in the 3rd quarter because Wake Forest burned nearly 12 minutes in the time of possession on the 15 minutes of the quarter. They owned the ball for nearly 12 minutes. You're not likely to be able to get to do that against Ole Miss. I think when last I saw the spread, it was about 23 and a half.
23 and a half. Yep.
Yeah. I would be hard pressed to take Wake and the points. This is, I think Wake can keep it close early on. Wake is going to be missing its best defensive lineman, Jasheen Davis. Well, maybe. He didn't play last week. As of Tuesday, he was unlikely. As of last night, he's maybe. So we'll see. He is the best defensive end pass rusher and probably one of the best in the ACC. But I think, look, Ole Miss is just such a complete team that it's hard to keep up right now.
Leanne,
anything for Tony?
I think you hit the nail on the head, talking about, Wake Forest and all. And I'm glad that you mentioned about the emotions because,
Mm-hmm.
you can, when you watch a team, especially like us, we have access to the team after loss, you see coaches and the emotions because, you can have great football players, but when you lose a game that you're supposed to win or vice versa, all the emotions come into play. And that's all those factors that we talk about. So you talk about, it's going to be, I'm glad you brought that up as well as the time of possession. They were able to, that was a key component in them still being able to hang for a while was
Mm-hmm.
keeping possession of that ball. And that's going to be a lot more difficult. You mentioned Walter Nolan and this Ole Miss defense. So where do you go from here? Like what, you talk about the challenge, but you're sitting in Wake Forest, you're in the head coach, position. What can we do with what we have? What do you think would be the key focus as far as trying to stop and slow down and get some points on the board? Because, the defense obviously for Wake is going to have its work cut out for us. But on the opposite end, at the end of the day, how do you get points on the board? And what do you think Wake is going to do as far as trying to get points on the board as best as they can with the tools they have going into such a heavy play game against Ole Miss?
Yeah, I think if you're Wake, you've got a couple of challenges on offense, as you ask about. Look, you're not going to be able to stop Walter Nolan all the time. Your offense is going to have to be quicker reacting, quick release. If you double team Nolan, then you're leaving some gaps on the other parts of the line. So that doesn't really work. You've got to worry about the blitzes from Ole Miss. So again, you've got to be quicker. If you're Bachmeier, you can't hold on to the ball so long. Everything's got to be quick release. It fits into Bachmeier's style of play because Hank doesn't have a downfield arm. He really doesn't. For all of his passing proficiency, he's got a cannon in the intermediate passing game, and hits those guys. So it's got to be a quick release. You've got to be able to run some offensive stunts with the running game. Damon Claiborne is explosive in the open field. You get him between the tackles, and he's very good. And again, he's been much better now that it's not so much of a rotation at running back. Tate Carney gets his carries, but it really is Damon Claiborne's running back room. So the challenge is going to be using the slot receivers a lot more. Taylor Marin, Deuce Alexander, very capable guys. You're going to have to use them in the short passing routes and move the ball in small chunks. Don't look for the downfield plays. They're not likely to be there. In terms of the emotions, look, I asked Hank in the post-game press conference, I said, you've been playing football a long time. This is his 6th year. Clearly, you've had games like this before that you thought you had won. What do you do? What do you do to pull yourself together? And in what role can you be in the locker room telling these guys to pull themselves together? And he talked about, this is the game. And this is what you signed up for. And, we didn't close the deal like we should have. And you go in and you learn the next day. Clausen talks about they got 24 hours to get over it. Not really, because Sunday mornings is their game film time, So they're all up Sunday morning looking at, what Clausen has put together. Look, I asked Clausen about the emotions, and I said, this may sound like a silly question. And in typical Dave Clausen fashion, he laughed at me and he said, there are no silly questions, just silly people who ask the questions. And he said, look, the losing is supposed to hurt more than winning is enjoyable. That's just the way this works. And he said, I've got a pit in my stomach from losing to Towson in 2007 when I was the head coach at Richmond. I still have a pit in my stomach over losing that one. He said, I didn't sleep all Saturday night or Sunday morning. How could I? There's too much work to do and get these guys together. He said, one of the things he's trying to emphasize this week is don't get caught up in the scoreboard. Don't get caught up in, who's got what yardage or how many yards we've given up. You got to have the blinders on and just play one play at a time. And he said, this is how a Northern, Illinois beats Notre Dame, right? you don't look at anything beyond the play in front of you. And you string a few plays together, and the next thing you know, you're moving the ball and you're being competitive. He said that's really all we can ask of them. He said, I like the way we're playing. I like the way that we're obviously better than they were last year when they finished 4-8. And so we're going to win a lot of games, but you've got to learn how to win. And we didn't do that Saturday, and so now we've got an even bigger challenge on this coming Saturday.
Seems like a narrow path.
Very. Yeah, very. Look,
So, there's no question about that.
Yeah, they've got to do a better job in the red zone. I mean, they had, 4 field goals, 3 of them were inside the red zone. They got to finish better inside the red zone. You can't be settling for threes against an Ole Miss team that's going to put up a boatload of points. So you've got to take advantage of every opportunity. You've got to be clean, not turn the ball over. And they haven't been turning the ball over, but then he took a moment to point out Ole Miss, which really doesn't turn the ball over. I think they had 7 fumbles all of last season. I mean, they take care of the ball. They do it well. They're a very disciplined program.
What's a lot less on defense, especially on those offensive fronts. And you brought it up too, and some of the games that I've watched outside of Ole Miss, you talked about the third downs and the conversions and all that, and putting points. You got to leave with more than 3 points, especially when you're playing a team like Ole Miss, where you got to put points on the board. But a lot of people don't talk about those third down opportunities. For the conversions, for turnovers, for all those things, and those can be a key in game. I mean, we saw it against Houston, Oklahoma last week. That third down became a critical thing. So I feel like that's another thing you're going to have to watch if you're a Wake Forest team. You want to try to make stuff happen on third down. Same with Ole Miss, because you want to put points on the board. So that's a great point that you brought up about, how important third downs are, any of those opportunities. Every opportunity in college football, especially, down the road is when you're on the field, because it's going to put points on the board or have an opportunity to give your team a chance to keep it close.
Yeah. And the strange thing I got to bring up about this weekend is, look, I don't know whose decision this was. I'm not, I didn't want to ask, the administrators of Wake Forest, because I don't want to call anybody out, but they have a week off after this game, and then they play, ironically enough, Hank Bachmeier's old team, Louisiana Tech, at home. My question was, who at Wake Forest decided it was a good idea to make this weekend homecoming? Are you kidding?
Yes.
You're supposed to play someone you have a viable chance of beating at home.
You could keep in close too. Yeah. No, wow. I didn't even realize it was homecoming in Wake. Yeah, we play Kentucky a couple weeks for homecoming. That's a little bit different. But I understand that. That's crazy. I didn't even know
it was a good idea.
Oh goodness. Yeah. Oh goodness.
Yeah, I was like, that doesn't work real well. So look, I mean, they'll be, by Wake Forest standards, a good sized crowd. And I say by Wake Forest standards because the stadium only holds 32,000 and change. And wow. I have discovered in my 2.5 years there, the student section packs their section and then leaves at halftime and generally doesn't come back. So there will be a big gap in the stadium there too.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because, as much success as Ole Miss has had, in this high scoring, that's one of the things that Lane Kiffin has brought up in his press conference, about the fact is encouraging students because, even with the team having success, Ole Miss, even the kids leave early too. And he brings about that because a lot of people don't realize, that even though the players don't seem to have their focus on the stands, it really does help the environment when you got, like you said, it's hard to say when you have, but, a lot of people are kind of on the fence about Lane bringing that up, well, why are we bringing it up? We're still winning ball club, you're still winning games, but at the end of the day, you want that energy from start to finish because, it could easily, it does in some games make a difference, like when you play a team like LSU or, you play other games that having those extra kids in the stands, especially in the student section. So that was really interesting to see how kind of it went both ways because there's a lot of Ole Miss fans who were like, Lane, just let it lead. Let's let it be. Just we're winning, it's okay. Let the kids. But I believe that, that energy and that support really does roll off into the players and the players see it, even though it doesn't seem like it. They always say, hey, why are you guys leaving? Even when we're up, stay 4 quarters. It can make a difference. So, you talk about that too, even at a place like Wake.
Sure. And in this day and age, and the way college football is now, which is different than what it was when Mark and I were growing up. And, I got a lot of years on Mark. So even when I was growing up, Lane isn't just the head coach. Lane is the CEO of the program. And so it's
Exactly.
appropriate for Lane to address these bigger picture issues that go on beyond the field of play. He's not just the X's and O's guy. That's not true in every program, but it is true with Lane and with Ole Miss. But Mark also knows, when I spent, my years prior to being out here and, covering UCLA in the early Chip Kelly era, where, it was an empty 92,000 seat Rose Bowl because, Chip couldn't win, and, these cavernous stadiums. At least at Wake Forest, it's only a 32,000 seat stadium. So even if a bunch of people leave, it's still, it still looks like a good sized crowd. Exactly.
Well, that's good.
Well, Tony, we're going to leave you with a ray of hope. This is the best I can do.
Okay.
As you well know, Wake leads the all-time series 2-0.
Right.
That's it.
That's all is the ray of
hope. I hate to say this about Rebels, but look, we had Northern Illinois. No one ever thought they could pull it off. So maybe Wake comes off and keeps it close. Hopefully, it's an exciting ball game, especially as homecoming. But appreciate you being on with us.
I think Clawson's goal would be, let's just play well. Let's, whatever happens on the scoreboard. He needs to see the team play well. He needs to see the team play clean, meaning no turnovers, no stupid mistakes. And that you come out of there knowing you got a week off to kind of recover and recoup before, you've got one more out of conference game, and then you head into the deeper ACC schedule. And that's really all you can do right now if you're Wake.
Tony, appreciate you being here as always. Everybody check out Tony's work at Last Word on College Football.
Glad to do it, and congratulations on the new show. And I'm sure it's going to do really well.
Thank you so much. All right, Tony. Thanks. Enjoy the game this weekend.
All right, be well.
All right. There we got the take from Tony, and the spread is 22.5 to 23.5, somewhere in that range.
So hasn't really moved too much, about a point. Yeah, which of course we didn't see. I think it's one of the smaller spreads that maybe Ole Miss has had. A little bit closer, but still, that's a lot of points for Wake. Yeah, for Wake to make up, no doubt. But he mentioned, it's gonna be a tough game for Wake Forest, especially coming after a loss. How do you get your morale and everything going? But it's gonna be key. And like I said, and he brought it up, and I think that we haven't seen a lot from Ole Miss as far as the secondary, but the blitzing is going to be difficult for a Wake Forest team. They're going to have their work cut out for them. As I think this week we're going to see a lot more blitzing from Ole Miss, and I think that's one of the weaknesses that Wake Forest has battling. And on the offense, like you said, how do you control the ball? How do you go up against people like Walter Nolan and in a defensive front and a secondary, that is made to put extreme pressure? And I think that while we've seen a lot of pressure this last couple of weeks from the defense and secondary, I think that this week we really are going to see, P. Golding and his defensive staff come out there and bring a lot more, even in a game like this, because like I said, every game is a preparation for the next game as they, get closer to SEC play. I mean, we got Kentucky coming up in a couple of weeks, and you can say what you want about that game, but again, every game is important for Ole Miss, because like I said, down the road, if you lose to one of these small teams, or you may not lose, but you keep it close. Let's say Wake Forest hangs, or, there's all these scenarios and possibilities. We've seen it every day in college football. What happens down the road when the committee is, trying to make a choice, even in a 12 playoff, well, remember, they've had this close game, all these factor in. So these games are just as important, but I think really, like I said, in week 3, we're going to see a lot more of Ole Miss come out, especially on the defense, especially on the secondary, put pressure, because Lane Kiffin and his staff, they're not going to care who they're playing. They're gonna play like they're playing an SEC team, like they're on the road to an SEC conference game, and that's I think the mentality they have to be, because I think this is a team that we've seen over the years, really go strong early on, but they've not been able to close. But again, he brought it up. I think this is the most balanced team we've ever seen out of Ole Miss. And it's not just on one side of the ball. It's on and it goes super deep. That's another key thing. I think people always ask me, covering the ACC, when you talk about teams like Alabama before Saban left, how is, even in the worst teams that Saban had, you could say, which were still elite in the company of the bigger team, how was he able to do it? It was depth. And Lane Kiffin has taken, that, what he's learned in the NFL, what he's learned at every stop. Of course, his father, Monty, a great defensive mind too, that he was able to have on his staff before his Pat, all these things. And then having his brother Chris back, and all these different elements, he's taken all these things and really incorporated into the super team. And it's hard because you don't want to sound biased, but, we're not the only people saying how great Ole Miss looks. I mean, everybody, they are slowly living up to the hype. But the important thing about that is they're not focused on that. Like you said, when you see Jackson Dart ask about the Heisman, when you see, it all reverts back to is we're looking ahead at winning a national championship. We're looking ahead at every game. And I think that mentality has really helped, and it showed. And again, about the culture that is going on, because I think that we see in the locker room that we haven't had necessarily in a long time, is that Lane Kiffin has a hold of his ball club, of his coaching staff, and everybody is playing with a purpose. Everybody is playing with this mentality of let's get to work, let's get it done. But every game is a chance to be 1-0. Whether you win or you lose, every chance is a new opportunity. And again, it's about being productive. And I think that we're seeing that in so many ways. So I think we're going to see more out the gate of the Wake Forest. Just because it's a non-conference opponent doesn't mean that Lane Kiffin's going to let off the brakes. And I think we've seen that so many times. But like I said, I think we're going to see more of a interesting package as far as play calling. I think we'll see more of what we'll see in SEC play. Like I said, I can't help but hit that home, because I just think that now it doesn't matter who we put in certain positions. Ole Miss is going to produce something, and they're going to put pressure, and I expect, like I said, the secondary to cause a lot of turnovers in this game for Wake. They're going to put on a lot of pressure, and it's going to be interesting to see the players that we may not be hearing that we haven't heard in the first week. I wouldn't be surprised if they have an opportunity to come in, because I think that that's the key goal at the end of the day, is to be able to have depth. Because if you have depth, you can stay fresh. So if your first string is as great as your third string, it doesn't matter, because you're putting points on the board. So it's going to be a great game. I do feel sorry for Wake that it is homecoming, because like I said, I agree with Tony there. I don't know who decided to schedule that game against homecoming, but hey, you never know, there's a lot of things that could factor in here.
Yeah, that's not the way it's done. Homecoming, that's not the way it's done. You usually target your worst opponent for homecoming. That's the way it's done.
Someone that you can keep it close with. Yeah, there's a chance.
Everybody to be happy at homecoming. All right, Leanne, what are you working on right now that you would like people to know about?
Well, of course, it's Thursday, so getting ready for Friday Night Lights. This week, we're going to be focused on one of our top recruits as far as our game of the week out in Escambia. Ladarian Clardy, a name that we've been talking about for some time. He's got, Washington just came on the mix. His schedule, I believe, to committed is about 10, maybe 9 days already. He pushed back his commitment after Washington. He was just on a visit with us this past week. So that's a kid we're going to watch. And then there's a couple kids, believe it or not, that are 2025s that Ole Miss is looking at out of Texas. Nelson McGuire out of Milton, really stout offensive lineman. Toby Hastrup, another edge out of Mayde Creek. So making a late play for these 2025s that are kind of under the radar. We got a lot of Texas roots, believe it or not. Randall Joyner, our new director of player personnel, DJ Mann, former, coach out in Texas. So the Rebels are going to Texas on the recruiting trail. If you've noticed, I spent a lot of kind of timeline there trying to recruit that talent, talking about that talent. So, yeah, just getting ready for Friday night. Like I said, the light will be on Ladarian Clardy. I think that's the countdown that everybody's waiting for. Like I said, really gifted, talented safety. Kind of felt like Ole Miss was the leader, but again, like we talked about, NIL, recruitment change. There's so many things that go into these factors. So he'll be who we'll be focusing on this week, along with the two other names that I mentioned. So we're just excited about another week, it'll be interesting to see how this road game, how it goes, how it will change the recruiting shape, and then we'll come back home, of course, and, get ready for Kentucky down the road and in a couple weeks for our homecoming, and I'll be down for that game. So like I said, just keeping eyes out on, who we're looking at, and some of the kids, always looking for new talent. So like I said, it never ends, but I think the focus this week for us is going to be Ladarian Clardy and trying to finish and close that deal. And the Rebels have done, I think, everything that they can and remain steadfast. And again, another talented safety out of Florida, who's probably one of the most sought out safeties in his class. So that's always, like I said, it's never ending. But hopefully we can close this deal here soon. In 9 days, he'll be an Ole Miss Rebel.
Very good. All right, here's the deal, everyone. Thursdays, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Make it on back next Thursday with us, talking Ole Miss football and gearing up for the SEC opener at that point. No. Will it be the SEC opener the next week?
It will be, and it's our homecoming. Yeah, our SEC opener is it's out. Yeah, So we're almost there. Home stretch. It'll be, and like I said, that'll be a special game to be broadcasting. I will be in Oxford, and as some of you guys may or may not know, I actually started in covering the University of Kentucky. So, and I actually have a really talented kid that I helped recruit who's playing on that offensive line at Kentucky. So it will be a bittersweet UK, my Cats versus my Rebels, but it'll be an exciting game. But yeah, it's going to be exciting down the stretch to be able to bring the show to you with SEC play, because like I said, it's going to get crazy if it already hasn't in week 3 and 4.
The last time Kentucky came to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, it was a great game that went right down to the wire. I remember that one just a couple years ago.
Yes, a couple of years ago, and Kentucky still hasn't quite found its footing. So we'll see. They also have that big game against South Carolina, this week. So, and we've seen how South Carolina can kind of play spoiler. So it's, like I said, week 3 is going to be another interesting week. Like I said, the conferences, especially ACC, SEC, kind of seeing where things are going to go, because you never know what can happen.
All right, folks. Again, next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, right here with Leanne and myself, and track Leanne's work. You can just follow her on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it these days. You see it right there. There's the handle. And you can track all of Leanne's work right there. Leanne, appreciate you being here and starting this up with us. And
I'm excited, and thanks to everyone who's tuned in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you have a great weekend. Enjoy all the football. And we'll make it back here next Thursday.
Sounds good. Hotty toddy.